James looked around him, unable to help but feeling nervous. After all, it was late at night on Halloween and he just happened to be standing in the middle of a cemetery. The fact that he wasn't alone offered him comfort as well as a reason not to show his discomfort. "Okay, here we are," Kevin exclaimed, swinging his flashlight over the ground around them. "This should be a good spot." "Yeah," James agreed with a nod. "It should be." There were currently 4 other people with James, though he was the youngest, even if not by much. James had turned 15 just a couple months earlier and was average for his age, or at least he thought he was average. His sister just told him he was geeky. Allie was James' older sister, though only older by a little more than a year. She was a gorgeous blonde cheerleader whom James liked to tease about being a stereotype. Kevin was Allie's boyfriend, a tall and very athletic football player with black hair and a charming smile that nearly always seemed to be present when the ladies were around. "Good," Ryan exclaimed as he dropped a backpack onto the ground. "Let's get this over with." James nodded as he opened the backpack and began taking out the contents, glancing at Ryan as he did so. Ryan was Kevin's best friend, a lean and wiry musician who was always friendly with everyone. What a jock and a wannabe rock star had in common James didn't know, but they'd apparently been close friends since they were kids. The last member of the group was Jen, Allie's best friend. Their friendship was even more mysterious than that of Ryan and Kevin. Jen was a slender artsy girl with short brown hair and glasses, not the type of pretty and popular girls whom Allie usually hung around with. "Hurry up already," Kevin exclaimed, "we don't have all night." "I think we have until midnight," James responded with a grin as he began setting things up. "The spell I found says it can only be cast on Halloween night, but it doesn't give any specific time." "So tell me again," Allie asked, "why are we standing in the middle of a cemetery? I mean, we could be at a Halloween party instead." "Because your brother found a magic spell that grants wishes," Kevin shrugged, gesturing at James. James nodded. "Actually, the spell is to summon a magic spirit who can grant our requests, but you already know that." "I know," Allie rolled her eyes. "I'm just wondering why I actually believed you." "Probably because the writing on that spell started glowing this morning," Jen pointed out with a faint smile. "I don't really believe it either," Ryan grinned, "but look at it this way. If it's just a joke, we can always brag about how we were out in a graveyard on Halloween. I mean, how cool is this?" He gestured around them, then added, "And if by some miracle it does work, then we get wishes granted." "This better work." Kevin glared at James. "Whatever." Allie shook her head in annoyance. "Let's just do this so we can go home." She looked at Kevin and grinned. "We can still make it to Michelle's party." "Are you about done?" Jen asked James. James nodded and looked at the materials he'd set up. He'd made a circle with chalk powder, and in the middle of the circle was a jack-o'-lantern. There were 4 lit candles, 1 inside the jack-o'-lantern and 3 more placed around it. The final items required were the offerings, which were placed in front of the jack-o'-lantern, a small pile containing cookies, candy, and Halloween toys. "It seems kind of strange that it calls for an offering of candy," Jen pointed out with a skeptical look at James. "I thought this kind of thing needed a human sacrifice or something." "We're not summoning a demon," James argued weakly. "At least I don't think it's a demon." He gulped nervously, hoping that he wasn't wrong, just as he was hoping this really worked. James looked over the sheet of paper that he'd found stuffed in a library book 2 months ago and read over the description of how to set up the spell. He quickly double-checked that everything was set up according to the directions, then turned his attention to the words, which were glowing green. They'd been ordinary writing until that morning when they'd begun to glow, giving him a reason to believe that this spell might actually be real after all. "Get started already," Kevin scowled impatiently. "Or do I have to read it myself?" He reached for the paper in James' hand, though James quickly pulled it away. "I can do it." James glared at him in annoyance. After taking a moment to read through the last bit of directions one more time, James began to read the strange-sounding words aloud. It wasn't a long and complicated spell like out of some movie, but was merely a half-dozen words in some language he didn't know. "Is that all?" Ryan asked with a cheerful chuckle when James was finished. "For a joke like this, I was expecting a little more showmanship. You know, some fireworks or something." Suddenly the flames on the candles around the circle jumped up to nearly a foot in height, while the glow coming from the jack-o'-lantern's eyes turned an eerie green. A moment later the pile of candy in front of the jack-o'-lantern erupted into green flame as well, burning brightly for a moment until the entire pile was gone. "Holy shit," Ryan exclaimed, "that's what I'm talking about." "Damn, it's really working," Kevin gasped in amazement. Allie clutched Kevin's arm and just stared at the jack-o'-lantern with a scared expression. Her eyes were locked on the green glow coming from the carved face. Jen gulped nervously, but stared at the same scene in fascination and awe. "It's working," James whispered, his heart racing with nervous excitement. Then the jack-o'-lantern began to rise from the ground, supported by a pillar of blackness. It raised higher as the blackness beneath it spread and took shape, forming into the image of a man's body. In mere moments a figure now stood there, wearing black tattered robes and with a jack-o'-lantern for a head. "Who has summoned Samhain?" the strange being asked in a strange hollow voice. He slowly looked at the 5 gathered before him and added, "Name yourselves humans." They all looked at each other nervously for a moment, then back at Samhain. Finally James gulped and decided to go first since this was all his idea. I'm James." "Ryan," Ryan said, giving a forced grin. Each of the others nervously introduced themselves as well. Kevin was the last to give his name before abruptly demanding, "Do we get our wishes now?" Samhain stared at Kevin for a moment with his glowing green jack-o'-lantern eyes. And though his entire face was merely carved from a pumpkin, it moved in a very unpumpkin-like manner, showing more expression than James ever thought possible. "You may each make one request," Samhain finally said, his voice now containing an edge of annoyance, though Samhain is not bound to grant them. "You have each submitted yourselves to Samhain to be blessed or cursed at Samhain's whim." "What?" Allie exclaimed in surprise. "No way. I am so out of here." Allie turned to run when Samhain raised a solid black hand and gestured. Suddenly green flames burst from the ground and formed a ring which surrounded all of them. The flames rose nearly 8 feet into the air, too high to jump over to escape. "I don't think he wants us to leave," Jen pointed out, staring at Samhain in fear. "You're supposed to grant our wishes." Kevin glared at Samhain with a mixture of fear and anger. "Do you not know the words you spoke to summon Samhain?" Samhain demanded. James gulped. "I just read this spell. I don't know what language this is." Samhain shook his head then muttered, "What fools." His hollow voice now held amusement. "Mortals never know what they agree to when they call Samhain." Then he looked straight at James and continued, "In your tongue, the closest meaning of those words are trick or treat." "Trick or treat?" James blinked in surprise. "The words you spoke called to Samhain," Samhain explained, "and beseeched Samhain to give you either his curse or his blessing, to give either a trick or a treat." "Damn," Ryan exclaimed. "That's not fair," Allie protested. "I don't want a trick. He'd better give us the treats," Kevin muttered. Jen just stared at Samhain and shook her head. "I can't believe this is real. Magic really does exist." Then she smiled faintly, excited by the idea of possibly receiving Samhain's blessing, whatever it was. "What if we changed our minds?" Ryan asked carefully. "I mean, we didn't realize we might get cursed." "It is too late for that," Samhain exclaimed. "Time is short, so make your requests if you wish." It may suit Samhain's whim to grant them. However, his tone suggested this might not be likely. "I want to be the best football player in the world," Kevin announced with a hungry look on his face. "I want to be a rich and famous football star with gorgeous babes all around me." "I wish," James started, but Allie elbowed him and exclaimed, "I'm next." She looked at Samhain and smirked. I want the power to make men do anything I want. Good one, Jen said, though she looked just a little skeptical. She gave Allie a slightly envious look, then bit her lower lip nervously for a moment before telling Samhain, I just want guys to think I'm pretty for once. Dude, I don't know what to wish for, Ryan said. I mean, I didn't even think this would work. Damn. He shook his head. This is fucking awesome. You can wish to be the world's greatest rock star, Kevin grinned at Ryan. Ryan just shrugged. Maybe. I'm not sure. He shook his head again before adding, that seems kind like cheating though. James watched Ryan for a moment, and since Ryan was still thinking about it, he turned and looked at Samhain. I wish I could have my ideal body. Your requests have been heard, Samhain said, ignoring the fact that Ryan had never actually made his request. Now it is time for Samhain to decide your fates. Oh shit, Ryan muttered, looking worried for a moment. I hope this isn't as bad as I think it is. He glanced at Kevin and added, I mean, that sounds kind of scary when you think about it. Like something out of a horror movie, Jen added nervously. James nodded as well, not sure whether to feel nervous or excited by what was about to come. On one hand, he could get a treat and have his greatest dream come true, but on the other hand he could be tricked and end up living a nightmare. Kevin stared at Samhain with a defiant expression, as though daring this strange being to do anything other than give Kevin exactly what he wanted. Allie just grabbed his arm and held on tight. Samhain merely gestured at Kevin, and suddenly the football player was engulfed in green flames. Allie jumped back from him with a scream while Kevin stood there looking confused as to why he wasn't actually burning. What the? Kevin exclaimed in surprise. Then Kevin let out a loud gasp as his very flesh began to move and change. He grunted, not quite in pain, but in extreme discomfort, as his bones and muscles moved beneath his skin. A moment later the changes became far more visible as his features softened and his clothes grew larger on his shrinking body. What's happening to him? Allie demanded, staring at Kevin with an expression of terror. Kevin grabbed his chest in confusion and then horror as two mounds swelled under his hands. At the same time his hair grew longer and more luxurious, while all of his features softened and became more and more feminine. Kevin, Ryan blurted out, you're a chick. Kevin stood there with an expression of shock on his, now her beautiful face. In mere moments he had transformed from a large and athletic football player into a very attractive young woman with long brunette hair. Holy shit, Kevin exclaimed, his sexy new voice filled with horror as he realized how his body had changed. He grabbed at his crotch and felt the empty space where his former pride had once rested. No fucking way. However, Kevin's changes weren't completely finished. His body has completed its transformation, but now his clothes began to change, shrinking to fit his new body but also changing color and style. Within seconds he was now wearing the familiar uniform of one of their school's cheerleaders. You shall enable your football team to win, Samhain announced, a faint hint of amusement echoing in his hollow voice, but not as a player. You shall, however, have your request to be surrounded by gorgeous women, the other cheerleaders. A cheerleader you shall be, whether you desire it or not. Of course, that shall soon be no problem, as you will discover you do desire it, more than nearly anything. Then Samhain laughed. Trick. You turned him into a girl, Allie exclaimed in horror, stepping even further away from Kevin. Samhain merely turned his attention to Allie, and as soon as his fiery gaze settled on her, the green flames which had covered Kevin a minute before now covered her instead. Her entire body was engulfed in the strange green fire that didn't burn. Allie let out a scream of near panic even before her body began to change. Allie's clothes grew tighter on her and began to tear at the seams as her body swelled larger. Her long blonde hair shortened even as she grew taller. In mere seconds it was obvious that her transformation was nearly the exact opposite of what Kevin had just undergone, as she became more and more masculine. Allie, Jen and James both blurted out at the same time. It had hardly taken any time at all for Allie to finish her transformation, and now she stood there as tall and muscular man who would have fit right in on the school football team. In fact, now he was even taller and more muscular than Kevin had originally been. Sam Hain stared at her for a moment, radiating satisfaction as he announced, "Soon you shall realize your new desire to play football. You shall play while the other," he pointed at Kevin, "shall cheer you on. You will be a leader of men in the game and they shall follow your lead." Then he bowed his head slightly before adding, "Trick." "Ali!" Jen exclaimed, staring at her friend in stunned disbelief. "Ali!" Kevin said as he tore his attention from his new breasts to stare at her as well. James just stared at his sister for a moment before muttering, "I guess it's Al now." Suddenly Sam Hain raised his hand and gestured towards Ryan. Ryan gulped and took an instinctive step back, just a moment before a pillar of green flame erupted in front of him. The flame vanished after mere seconds, though something had been left behind. "What the?" Ryan gasped, staring at the object in front of him. Then he blinked in surprise and exclaimed, "It's a guitar." Ryan reached for the guitar which had appeared in front of him and held it up for a better look. It was an electric guitar decorated with a black and orange design which looked like a jack-o'-lantern face. "Awesome," Ryan mused as he began to strum it, amazed at the loud and clear notes which came from the instrument. It was almost as though it were plugged into an amplifier, though there was absolutely no amplifier in evidence. "Dude, this is totally wicked." "Treat," Sam Hain stated calmly as he then turned his attention to Jen. Jen gulped nervously as she saw she was next and whispered, "Oh no." Green flames burst into life around Jen, burning into her very being without actually burning her. Her body quickly began to change and transform, her short brown hair began to lengthen and lighten until it became long and golden blonde. Her chest began to swell larger until her shirt burst open from the pressure. "Holy shit," James gasped, staring at Jen in amazement. Kevin and Ryan both stared at her as well, though Ali was so busy feeling up her own body that she barely even noticed the transformation her best friend had undergone. Jen grabbed her large breasts in shock, amazed that they'd become so large, round and firm. They were perfect. She looked down at herself and gasped, seeing that her entire body had indeed transformed in ways she'd only dreamed of before. She was now a gorgeous and busty blonde woman, even hotter looking than Ali had been a short time ago. "Wow," James whispered, unable to take his eyes off Jen or believe how gorgeous she'd become. "Treat," Sam Hain stated in his strange hollow voice. "Why'd you do that to her and this to me?" Ali demanded angrily. "That's not fair." However, Sam Hain ignored her and turned his attention to James instead. James gulped and took an instinctive step back, nervously glancing around and seeing the flaming circle was still there, preventing him from running away, even if he wanted to. "I'm ready," James grimaced, bracing himself for whatever was going to come. Sam Hain silently gestured and the green flames erupted around James. He felt the strange tingle rush through his body. At the very instant he saw the jade aura surrounding him. He gasped at how powerful the sensations were, not quite sure if this was painful or glorious. James felt his entire body being reshaped, much as Kevin, Ali, and Jen's had, though he had no idea how he was being changed at first. After a few seconds, though, he became aware of how his body was changing. "My chest," James grimaced and grabbed at his chest just as two mounds began to swell beneath his hands. Other changes rushed through James' body, more than he could keep track of. He felt a tickling along his shoulders as his hair grew much longer, becoming long and silky. His groin ached and began to pinch and pull while his chest continued to push out. The transformation felt as though it was going on forever, though it was finished in mere moments. However, even before the changes were complete, James knew what he'd become, having just seen Kevin and Jen go through similar changes just minutes earlier. I'm a girl," James whispered as he stared down at his new breasts and feminine body. Everyone stared at James, who had become a busty young woman every bit as gorgeous as Jen. He cupped his generous breasts, then reached up and felt his now strawberry blonde hair. With a visible gulp, he slowly looked down at the rest of his body and felt his crotch, which was now empty of its familiar equipment. "James," Ali blurted out as she stared at her brother, glaring at him jealously. You shall desire attention, Samhain announced with a hint of amusement in his voice. You shall dress to best display your body. Suddenly Kevin demanded, turn me back right this instant, you damn pumpkin-headed freak, or I'll make a pie of you. Don't, James warned Kevin. If Samhain could do all this to them merely on a whim, there was no telling what he might do if he became angry. Samhain merely stared at Kevin for a moment before announcing, Samhain has done that which he was summoned to do. You have each been given my curse or blessing, a trick or a treat. Then he gestured to the green wall of flame and it immediately vanished. It is time for Samhain to depart. Suddenly the green glow vanished from the jack-o'-lantern that comprised Samhain's head, and it became as dull and lifeless as any ordinary carved pumpkin. At the same time, the black mass which made up Samhain's body began to melt away and vanish. After merely moments, the jack-o'-lantern fell to the ground where it smashed open. He's gone, Allie blurted out with mixed relief and fear. Then she looked down at herself and gasped, now I'm stuck like this. Kevin turned to James and snarled, use that spell again. Call him back. I don't think it works like that, James protested weakly. I think it only works once a year. Then James looked at the sheet of paper which he dropped to the ground during Samhain's arrival. The paper was gone, now merely a small pile of black ash remained. It burned up. Shit, Kevin exclaimed, this is your fault. Don't blame him. Jen glared at Kevin. You were eager enough to call that thing when you thought he'd grant a wish. She looked at each of the others. All of us were. Samhain was the one who tricked us. That's easy for you to say, Allie snapped at her friend, gesturing down at herself in disgust. You got turned into that and I got turned into a guy. She gave Jen a jealous glare. Kevin gestured down at his transformed body as well. And what about me? He said I had to be a cheerleader. Ryan gave him an appreciative look and strummed on his guitar. Dude, you'd make a totally hot cheerleader. Bite me, Kevin snarled while Ryan gave him a look that suggested he was considering that very thing. James looked at the others, hardly able to believe that gorgeous blonde on his left was the plain and artsy Jen, while the hot brunette on his right was actually his sister's boyfriend, the macho football player. And then of course was Allie. His pretty sister had become a big and muscular guy. It hardly seemed possible. He changed 4 of us, James said thoughtfully. He made 3 of us go through sex changes. I guess I got pretty lucky, Ryan grinned, clutching his new guitar possessively. He gave it a very appreciative look. Then he gave a nervous look at Kevin, unsure what to say to his friend. The things he was thinking about Kevin were things he never would have imagined thinking about him before. Maybe because you didn't actually make a wish, Jen pointed out with a shrug. All the rest of us did. Whatever, Kevin snarled, looking down at himself again before shaking his head in disgust and turning to leave, shaking visibly as he did so. I am so out of here. Later, dude, Ryan told him before he turned and began to leave as well. He paused just long enough to give Kevin one more glance before shaking his head and continuing on his way. Allie muttered, what am I going to tell Mom and Dad? What am I going to do? She wandered off as well, barely seeming to notice any of the others as she considered what this drastic transformation would mean for her. Jen looked at James and gave him a nervous smile. I'm so sorry. I know that's going to be hard for you to get used to. She gestured at herself and added, I guess I've got a lot to get used to now too, but not as much as you obviously. Yeah, James cupped his breasts, I've definitely got a lot to get used to. Then he remembered what Samhain said about how he would now desire attention. He shuddered slightly at that. A lot. I'll try to help you learn how to be a girl, Jen told him with a wry smile. I have a feeling Allie won't exactly be very helpful. When has she ever been? James shrugged. They stared at each other for a moment before Jen nervously told him, I guess I really should go too. I mean, I sure don't want to stay around here. She gestured to the cemetery which surrounded them, then added, I'll see you later, I guess. Once James was alone, he reached down and felt his new breasts, thinking that they felt absolutely enormous, though he suspected that they weren't really much larger than DD cup size. Of course, he was no expert on cup sizes and could only guess. My God, James whispered with a shake of his head. Then James slowly turned for one more look at the smashed jack-o'-lantern which had served as Sam Hain's head. He couldn't help but imagine a flicker of green flame in one of those eyes, though he knew it was just his mind playing tricks on him. Still, James felt a faint chill run down his spine. James took one more look down at his new body and frowned, not completely sure what Sam Hain had intended with this transformation. After all, Sam Hain had been interrupted, then departed before he could finish explaining. Damn, James mused, cupping his breasts again. He had a feeling he'd be doing a lot of that from now on when he was alone. Then James frowned, not quite sure what Sam Hain had intended for him. Was this intended to be a trick, a nasty twist on his own wish as Sam Hain had done to Kevin and Allie? Or perhaps Sam Hain had somehow known that James had always envied Allie and secretly wished he could be a beautiful girl too? Did he mean this to be a trick or a treat? James asked himself with a faint smile of amusement. Of course, he decided that it didn't really matter what Sam Hain had intended. As far as I'm concerned, it's definitely a treat. James smiled at that, absolutely loving his new body and looking forward to checking it out in a mirror as well as the privacy of his own room. Having a body like this was definitely a dream come true. In fact, Sam Hain's warning that he'd desire attention only seemed another part of that fantasy. After all, what good was having a body like this if he didn't enjoy showing it off a bit? And no one else will know, James chuckled to himself as he turned and started his walk home as well. As far as his sister and the others were concerned, he was just another one who'd been tricked and cursed. None of them would ever know that whatever Sam Hain had intended, this was actually the ultimate treat. In fact, he could enjoy it all he wanted, and they'd just assume it was part of the curse, a part of Sam Hain's proclamation that he'd desire attention. It was the perfect excuse. This is definitely the best Halloween ever, James mused to himself with a smirk. A minute later, the cemetery was once again empty of any living soul, so there was none to witness the faint green flicker that emanated from the smashed jack-o'-lantern's eyes. They were done to hear the strange hollow voice which whispered, "Trick or treat," from the ruined mouth, or to listen to the strange laughter which followed.